Brian Nickel, while we have you, and then we move on to another question involving some of the points that Pastor Kevin Lee was making in his excellent presentation. Brian, could you, because this is a major issue, the origin of limestone. So this is another challenge that we see critics constantly push on us. There's several videos out on YouTube from prominent evolutionists arguing that young Earth creationists cannot explain the massive amounts of limestone that exists on the planet in just 4,500 years since the flood. But you have an excellent video. You have an excellent explanation, a technical explanation for the origin of limestone. I was wondering, in a nutshell, if a critic were to present that challenge to a young Earth creationist, what is the best way for us to answer it?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is to ask some questions about the properties, the chemical way that limestone is generated. And whenever you generate a molecule of limestone, you also release a molecule of carbon dioxide. And so I think Walt's theory is the only theory I've heard that proposes that the production of these chemicals, both the limestone and the extra free gaseous carbon dioxide. All other theories are proposing that for that to have happened on the surface in oceans, in like warm, shallow oceans. And Walt is the only one who's proposed that this process is happening under the surface in a sealed environment in what would be the Great Deep. And so that release of that carbon dioxide in Walt's scenario stays in the environment. It cannot escape up through the sealed environment of the crust. And so that CO2 molecule is free to rejoin with bicarbonates and produce another limestone molecule, and the CO2 can be reused thousands of times over. The problem with all theories of formation of limestone on the surface is that for every limestone molecule that exists on the Earth, there has got to be a CO2 molecule that was released into the atmosphere. And so, and the problem is when you look at how much limestone is on the Earth, there is 1,000 times more limestone in the sediments that are what we would say are flood sediments in the limestone deposits that we see than there are in all the limestone deposits that are accounted for with the sea and coral and everything else, and all life, or things that use limestone shells or anything like that. And so the stuff that was produced in the sediments had to have had a source that was sealed off from the atmosphere environment, or else the atmosphere would have been poisoned 1,000 times over with CO2. Like, we would not be Earth. We would be like some hellish form of Venus. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge with limestone, is explaining where does all the extra free CO2 gas go in your scenario. If it's happening on the surface, then you have a poisoned atmosphere.
Yeah, I think the secularists, they have a bigger problem with limestone than we do. Bob Dietz didn't have a clue where it came from.
Matt, you're presenting some really good visuals to help showcase the strength of Brian's points there. Did you want to briefly explain what the audience is looking at in terms of those visuals, brother?
Sure. Yeah. What I was doing was I was showing that at the thermal vents right now under the ocean, you can go there and see the formation of this coral coming from the fountains of the Great Deep still. So it's not a far stretch to say that's how they formed during the flood in a rapid succession in massive amounts. And you also have to take into consideration that the pre-flood world was shallow oceans as well. So we're not saying every drop of limestone that exists is made chemically. No, there were like over 1,000 years of limestone being formed, but the global flood produced it chemically really fast. And that's what I was showing on these pictures. Is these are actual pictures in the ocean coming from the thermal vent area, and they're pure calcium, or chalk, as you can say, calcium carbonate. And these exist. Okay.
So what hydroplate theory proposes is that the limestone, the majority of the limestone we see in the deposits in our sediments on the continents, it wasn't produced fast. I mean, I guess everything's fast in a evolutionary timeline whenever we're talking, but I mean, it was produced during the time before the flood in the subterranean chamber over 1600 or 2000 years, depending on whether you are going with the Septuagint timeline or the Masoretic timeline. But it's thousands of years of production of this limestone and then that is what is ejected along with the water at the time of the flood. So it wasn't produced like immediately necessarily right after the flood, because the whole point of it is that it's produced in a sealed environment underneath the surface. That's how come the CO2 didn't poison the atmosphere.
Yeah, the subterranean chamber was basically the cement factory making calcium carbonate to then go up with the debris and mix it all up, and then over time to solidify. And they're finding the evidence of that even in space. And I remember
they find limestone in space, right?
Huh?
They're finding limestone in space.
They're finding calcium carbonates and stuff.
Not limestone. Yeah. But the molecule that is the basic makeup of limestone is calcium carbonate, and they're finding those in space, and they are bewildered. How did this stuff form? Because it would need to form in water, right?
Yeah. Right. And what I was thinking the other a while ago, if I can go, I mean, Brian, it is miraculously the only explanation. Secular people don't know how we can have limestone because we'd all be dead, just like Brian is saying. Dr. Baumgartner on your station, when you asked him where did limestone came from, he goes, "We need to do some more research." You can research your whole life; it doesn't change the chemical, and the chemical equation is the same. Every molecule creates a carbon, and there's thousands of times the Earth would die. The only explanation is it all was recycling. The carbon recycles over and over again to create the calcium carbonate, and until it ruptures. And what do we have coming out of volcanic gas? We have CO2. We have sulfur. We have other things that were all minerals that were being created and piled up by the dissolving of the lower part of the crust and the mantle.
One other thing I might...
And you have to ask, how in the world did a bunch of water get that deep into the earth and get trapped to then blow the top of Mount St. Helens off with a pyroclastic explosion of supercritical water?
Another thing that hydroplate theory can address is not just limestone, but also how dolomite formed, which is basically limestone, but where instead of calcium molecules, some of the molecules are switched out with magnesium. And it's not on my channel, but actually Brian's creation organization, the Twin Cities Creation Association, I think.
Twin Cities Creation Science Association, TCCSA.
Yeah. So if you go to their channel and look for my name or limestone, I guess, I gave another presentation where I expounded on that in addition to what I had in my video where I talk about how also dolomite formed and where'd all that magnesium come from to form all the dolomites in Italy and whatnot, all those dolomite muds that are in Italy that are solidified into rock now. Where'd all that form and how did it get so pure? Well, interestingly enough, mafic rocks like basalts and stuff that we believe the mantle is probably made of, they are chock full of magnesium. They're mafic, magnesium and iron. That's what mafic means. So that's where all the magnesium atoms came from that produced and mixed with to make dolomites as well.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is the hydroplate theory model has an elegant explanation scientifically for things like limestone, answering the heat and radiation problem, whereas the catastrophic plate tectonic model or other global flood models, they lack at this point good scientific explanations for the origin of limestone and an answer to the heat problem.
Yeah. And I want to make a correction that they find carbonates in asteroids, but not so far calcium carbonates. I want to make that distinction.
Gentlemen, Tony Reed, Anti-Creationist again, he asked this question in his video. How is water trapped, according to the hydroplate theory model, between discrete layers of granite and basalt in the hydroplate model? How did that happen?
That's not part of the theory. How the water got there is not part of the theory. That's when the theory starts.
That's where, okay. So is that basically the first assumption and everything else?
Yep, that's that. Yep. How everything got there is not part of the theory. Just like evolution, how life began isn't part of the theory.
Okay. So that's the created order, basically. Water was created in that state.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a layer of basalt, then there's the water, which is a mile deep, and then there's granite above it.
Yes, perfect. Yep.
I'd say a mile minimum. Probably much more than a mile. And if you read Walt's chapter very carefully, on when he's talking about that estimate, he's saying that is a bare minimum estimate. It's just that there are so many unknowns that we don't really have a great way of saying what a top limit is. So read through that real carefully. Even in his 8th chapter, I believe he had that reworded. I had talked to him about that and got him to reword it because a mile is just the bare minimum. It's probably many more miles.